The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the ramshackle trading post, and Tessa Perkins stepped down into the dust of New Mexico territory with nothing but a worn carpet bag and the clothes on her back, watching the driver disappear down the trail without so much as a backward glance at the woman he had just abandoned in the middle of nowhere. It was August of 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the small settlement that folks called Millerton, a cluster of buildings some 30 miles south of Santa Fe, where the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, and hope seemed as scarce as water. Tessa had paid the last of her money for passage here, following a letter from her uncle who had promised her work at his restaurant, only to discover upon arrival that her uncle had died 3 weeks prior of fever, and his establishment had been shuttered and sold to pay his debts. The man who delivered this news was the local shopkeeper, a thin fellow with wire spectacles who looked at her with something between pity and annoyance, as if her presence was just another problem this struggling town did not need. Tessa stood in the shade of his porch, trying to process what this meant, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her stomach that had nothing to do with the fact she had not eaten since yesterday morning. "There is a boarding house down the street," the shopkeeper offered, though his tone suggested he already knew what she would say. "I have no money for boarding," Tessa replied quietly, keeping her chin up despite the desperation clawing at her insides. She was 22 years old, alone in a strange place, and every door that might have been open to her had just slammed shut. The shopkeeper sucked his teeth and shook his head. "Cannot help you then, miss. Times are hard for everyone." Tessa thanked him anyway and walked back into the blazing afternoon, her mind racing through options that did not exist. She could not go back east. There was nothing for her there except memories of the factory work that had nearly broken her, and the tenement where her mother had died coughing blood into rags they could not afford to replace. She had come west because it was supposed to be different, supposed to offer something better than the grinding poverty that consumed everything beautiful in a person. She sat on a bench outside the shuttered restaurant that should have been her salvation, and allowed herself exactly 1 minute of despair before forcing herself to think. She was educated enough to read and write and do figures. She could cook, having learned from her mother who had once worked in a fine house before circumstances brought them low. She could sew, though not expertly. She was strong despite her slender frame, accustomed to hard work and long hours. Someone in this town needed something she could provide. She simply had to find them before nightfall. The settlement was small enough that she could walk its length in 20 minutes. There was the main street with its saloon, general store, land office, and a few other establishments. Behind these were scattered houses and corrals, and beyond that, the open range where cattle grazed on scrub grass that looked too sparse to sustain anything living. Tessa walked slowly, noting everything, trying to appear purposeful rather than desperate. That was when she saw him. He was working in a corral beside a weathered barn, a tall man with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that fell past his collar, wearing dusty clothes that had seen better days. He was gentling a horse, speaking to it in low tones she could not quite hear, his movements patient and unhurried despite the animal's nervous dancing. Something about the scene made her stop and watch, perhaps because it was the first peaceful thing she had witnessed since arriving in this harsh place. The man must have sensed her presence because he turned, and even from a distance, she could see his eyes were a startling blue-green, unexpected in his weathered face. He studied her for a moment, not unfriendly but cautious in the way of people who lived in hard country. "Help you with something, miss," he called out. Tessa moved closer to the fence, suddenly aware of how she must look, dusty from travel and clearly out of place. "I am looking for work," she said directly, seeing no point in dancing around the truth. "Any kind of work. I can cook, clean, mend, keep accounts. I am strong and I learn quickly." The man left the horse and walked to the fence, wiping his hands on his pants. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with a scar along his jaw and calluses that spoke of years of physical labor. His expression was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "You just arrive on that stage?" he asked. "Yes. I came to work for my uncle, but he has passed and his business is closed. Henry Perkins. You knew him?" "Only a little. I am sorry for your loss." The cowboy paused, his gaze drifting toward the house behind the barn. It was a simple structure, wood frame with a covered porch, showing signs of neglect in the way weeds grew up around the steps, and one shutter hung crooked. "I am Kellan Lawson. I run cattle on the land north of here, but I live in town when I am not out on the range." Tessa waited, sensing he was working toward something. "Truth is, I could use some help," Kellan continued slowly. "Place needs cleaning, and I cannot remember the last time I had a decent meal that was not beans or salt pork. But I cannot pay much, and it would not look right, you staying here without some kind of proper arrangement." "I am not concerned with appearances," Tessa said quickly. "I need work and I need a place to sleep. If you have both, we can work out fair terms." Kellan rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "People talk, though. This is a small town." "Then I will sleep in the barn," Tessa offered, past the point of pride. "I will work for meals and shelter until I can earn enough to find proper lodging. You need help, I need work. It seems straightforward to me." Something shifted in Kellan's expression, perhaps respect for her directness or simply recognition of shared desperation. "Barn is no place for a lady. There is a room off the kitchen that might work. Was meant to be a pantry, but it has a window and enough space for a cot. Would that be acceptable?" Relief flooded through Tessa so powerfully she had to lock her knees to keep steady. "That would be more than acceptable. Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Kellan said, but there was a hint of something almost like amusement in his voice. "You have not seen the state of the kitchen." He was not exaggerating. When Kellan led her into the house, Tessa found a bachelor's dwelling in the truest sense, with dust coating every surface, dishes piled in a tin basin, and a general air of neglect that spoke of a man too tired at the end of each day to do more than collapse into bed. The room off the kitchen was indeed small, but had good light from its window and would be perfectly adequate once cleaned. "I know it is bad," Kellan said, sounding almost apologetic. "My wife, she died 2 years back, and I have not been able to keep up with things the way she did." The information settled between them, explaining much. Tessa set down her carpet bag and turned to face him. "I am sorry for your loss. If you can spare a bucket and some soap, I will start with the kitchen. Do you have food stores I can use for cooking?" "Some. Not much variety." "I can bring more from the general store tomorrow." "Whatever you have will be fine for tonight." Tessa was already rolling up her sleeves, her mind cataloging what needed to be done and in what order. This was familiar territory, the kind of work she knew how to do well. "What time do you prefer to eat supper?" Kellan looked slightly bewildered by her efficiency. "Whenever it is ready, I suppose. I am not particular." 7 o'clock, then. That gives me time to set things right in here." He nodded and started to leave, then paused at the door. "Miss Perkins, I appreciate this. I know circumstances are not ideal, but I will do right by you. You have my word on that." "I believe you," Tessa said, and was surprised to find she meant it. There was something steady about Kellan Lawson, something that made her think he was a man who kept his promises. After he left to finish his work with the horses, Tessa stood in the middle of the chaotic kitchen and allowed herself a long breath. She had a roof over her head and the promise of meals. It was more than she had possessed an hour ago. The rest would sort itself out if she worked hard and kept her head down. She found a bucket and soap, hauled water from the pump outside, and began to scrub. The physical work was soothing, giving her anxious mind something concrete to focus on. She cleaned the dishes first, then the work surfaces, then the floor, working methodically until the kitchen began to look inhabitable. In a cupboard she found flour, lard, salt, and a few other basics. The cold box out back held eggs, some bacon, and a pitcher of milk that was still good. There were potatoes in a bin and a few withered onions. It was not much, but Tessa had made meals from less. She built up the fire in the stove, pleased to find it still functioned well despite the soot buildup. While it heated, she scrubbed the table and set out 2 places, finding mismatched plates and cutlery clean enough to use after washing. Then she set to work cooking, falling into the familiar rhythm of preparation that her mother had taught her years ago. By 7 o'clock, the kitchen smelled of frying bacon and fresh biscuits, and Tessa had managed to create a simple but hearty meal from the limited ingredients. She had made potato hash with eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy, and even found some preserved jam to accompany the bread. It was plain food, but well prepared and plentiful. Kellan appeared in the doorway exactly at 7, his face scrubbed and his hair still damp, clearly having made an effort to clean up before supper. He stopped when he saw the transformed kitchen, his eyes widening slightly. "You did all this in a few hours. It needed doing," Tessa said simply, ladling food onto his plate. "Sit down before it gets cold." He obeyed, settling into the chair with the careful movements of a man whose body ached from a full day's labor. Tessa served herself a smaller portion and sat across from him, suddenly self-conscious. This was the strangest supper she had ever shared, with a man who was essentially a stranger, in a house where she had no real claim to be. Kellan took a bite of the hash and went very still. Then he took another bite, and another, eating with the focused intensity of someone tasting something they had forgotten existed. He worked through half his plate before speaking. "This is the best meal I have had in 2 years, he said quietly. "Maybe longer." Tessa felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "It is nothing fancy. Does not need to be fancy to be good." Kellan met her eyes across the table. "You have a real talent for this." They ate in silence for a few more minutes, but it was not uncomfortable. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple visible through the kitchen window. Tessa found herself relaxing slightly, the knots of anxiety that had been wound tight all day beginning to ease. "Tell me about your cattle operation," she said, wanting to know more about this man who had offered her refuge. "Is it a large herd?" "Not as large as I would like," Kellan admitted. "I run about 200 head on open range north of here. It is hard country and I lose some every year to weather or predators, but it is mine and that counts for something." "You work it alone?" "Mostly. I hire help for roundup and drives, but day to day it is just me." He paused, seeming to consider something. "My wife, Clara, she used to help with the business side of things. Kept the books, managed the contracts with buyers. I have not been as good at that part." "I could help with that," Tessa offered. "If you would like. I am good with numbers." Kellan looked at her thoughtfully. "That would be useful if you are willing. Of course, it is only fair if I am living here." "About that." Kellan set down his fork, his expression serious. "I meant what I said about doing right by you. I can pay you $3 a week for cooking and cleaning. It is not much, but it is what I can afford right now. In addition to the room and meals, of course. If you help with the books and such, we can negotiate more." $3 a week was not generous, but it was honest pay, and more than Tessa had any right to expect given the circumstances. That is fair, she agreed. Thank you. There is something else. Kellan seemed uncomfortable again. I know I said people would talk, and they will. If it becomes a problem, if you hear things that make you uncomfortable, you tell me. I will not have folks being cruel to you on my account. The concern in his voice surprised her. I can handle talk, Tessa said. I have dealt with worse. I do not doubt it. Kellan smiled slightly, the expression softening his weathered face. You seem like someone who can handle just about anything. They finished the meal, and Tessa rose to clear the dishes. Kellan stood as well, carrying his plate to the basin. I can help with those. You do not need to do that. You cooked. Seems only fair I help clean up. It was such a simple thing, but it touched something in Tessa that had been cold for a long time. In her experience, men did not offer to help with dishes. They ate and left and expected everything to be managed without their involvement. The fact that Kellan stood there, sleeves rolled up and ready to help, spoke of a character she had not expected to find. They worked side by side at the basin, Tessa washing while Kellan dried. The kitchen window was open to catch the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Tessa found herself very aware of Kellan's presence beside her, the warmth of his arm occasionally brushing hers, the quiet sound of his breathing. She was halfway through the dishes when Kellan spoke, his voice soft but clear in the quiet kitchen. Would you consider staying? Not just for now, but permanently? Tessa's hand stilled in the warm water. She turned to look at him, surprised. You are offering me permanent employment after one meal. I am offering more than employment. Kellan set down the plate he had been drying, his blue-green eyes intense. I know this is sudden. I know you do not know me, and I do not know you, not really. But I have been alone in this house for 2 years, and in the space of one evening you have made it feel like a home again. That is not something I can let walk away. Tessa's heart was beating very fast. Mr. Lawson, I do not understand what you are asking. I am asking if you would marry me. The words hung in the air between them, so unexpected that Tessa could only stare. Kellan rushed on, his words tumbling over each other in a way that suggested he had not planned this, was speaking from impulse rather than calculation. I know it is crazy. I know we just met. But out here, people do not have the luxury of long courtships. They meet, they recognize something in each other, and they make a decision. I look at you, and I see someone strong and capable and kind. I see someone who could build a life in this hard country. And I think maybe you see something in me too, or you would not have trusted me enough to come here. I came here because I had no other choice, Tessa said, but her voice was shaking. Maybe, but you could have kept walking when I said people would talk. You could have insisted on the barn. Instead, you stayed, and you cooked a meal that felt like something from a life I thought I had lost forever. Kellan took a careful step closer. I am not a rich man, Tessa. I cannot offer you luxury or ease. But I can offer you a home, a partnership, and the promise that I will work every day to build something better for us. That has to count for something. Tessa turned back to the dishes, her mind reeling. This was insane. She had known this man for mere hours. Marriage was a serious commitment, not something to be decided on impulse. And yet, everything Kellan said resonated with a truth she could not deny. She was alone in the world. He was alone. They were both survivors, both trying to carve out something meaningful from difficult circumstances. Was it really so crazy to consider joining forces? What about love? She asked quietly. You loved your wife. I can see it in the way you talk about her. How can you ask me to marry you when your heart still belongs to someone else? Kellan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. I did love Clara. I will always love her memory. But she has been gone 2 years, and I have learned that grief does not mean the end of living. I am not asking you to replace her. I am asking you to be yourself, to make a new life with me that honors what we have both lost and what we might build together. As for love, I believe it can grow from respect and partnership. I respect you already, Tessa Perkins. I respect your strength and your directness and your willingness to work hard for what you need. That is a foundation we can build on. Tessa closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Every practical part of her brain was screaming that this was too fast, too risky. But there was another part, the part that had brought her all the way to New Mexico on nothing but hope, that whispered this might be her chance at something real. I need time to think, she said finally. This is not a decision I can make standing at a wash basin with soapy hands. Of course. Kellan stepped back, giving her space. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless. You have a place here as long as you want it, marriage or not. That promise, more than anything else, made Tessa think she might be able to trust him. A manipulative man would have pressed his advantage, would have made her feel obligated or threatened her security to force a decision. Kellan did neither. He simply made his offer and left the choice entirely in her hands. They finished the dishes in silence, the moment both heavy and strangely peaceful. When the last plate was dried and put away, Kellan bid her good night and retreated to his room, leaving Tessa alone in the clean kitchen with her tumbling thoughts. She prepared the small room off the kitchen for sleeping, finding sheets and a blanket that smelled of cedar from long storage. The cot was narrow but comfortable enough, and through the window she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Tessa lay down in her clothes, too tired to bother with the nightdress packed in her bag, and stared at the ceiling. Marriage. To a stranger. It should have seemed like madness, but instead it felt like possibility. She thought about Kellan's hands, scarred and calloused from hard work. She thought about the way he had spoken to the nervous horse, patient and kind. She thought about how he had offered to help with the dishes, how he had apologized for the state of the house, how he had given her space to make her own choice. These were not the actions of a cruel man or a thoughtless one. And what were her alternatives? She could stay here as his employee, but the town would talk regardless of propriety. She could try to find work elsewhere, but she had no money to leave and no guarantee of finding anything better. Or she could take this leap of faith, this strange offer from a cowboy who had looked at her with something like wonder after one simple meal. Sleep did not come easily, but sometime in the deep hours of night, Tessa made her decision. Morning light was filtering through the window when she woke to the sound of Kellan moving around in the kitchen. She rose quickly, smoothing her rumpled clothes and splashing water on her face from the basin she had filled the night before. When she emerged from her small room, she found Kellan attempting to make coffee, his movements clumsy in a way that suggested this was not his usual routine. "I can do that," Tessa offered. Kellan turned, and she saw hope and anxiety warring in his expression. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough." Tessa took over the coffee preparation, grateful for something to do with her hands. "I thought about your offer." The kitchen went very quiet. Kellan stood by the table, waiting. "I will marry you," Tessa said, the words coming out more steadily than she felt. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "I want a true partnership, not just cooking and cleaning while you make all the decisions. If I am going to be your wife, I want a voice in how we run the ranch and our lives." "Agreed." "I want time to develop feelings." "I know you said love can grow, and I believe that, but I need you to be patient with me. No expectations of affection I am not ready to give." Kellan's expression was serious. "I understand. I will not rush you. And if it does not work, if we find we cannot be happy together, I want your word that you will help me find somewhere else to go. I will not be trapped in a miserable marriage." You have my word on all of it." Kellan crossed to where she stood by the stove, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Anything else? Just one thing." Tessa met his eyes, needing him to understand. "I am afraid. This is terrifying, but I am choosing to trust you anyway." Something softened in Kellan's face. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was rough and warm, his grip gentle. "I am afraid too," he admitted, "but I think we can be brave together." The words settled something in Tessa's chest. She squeezed his hand once, then released it to finish making breakfast. They had much to do if they were going to marry. Kellan knew the local pastor, a circuit preacher named Reverend Mitchell who came through Millerton once a month. By luck or providence, he was due to arrive that very week. In the meantime, there were practical matters to arrange. Kellan went into town to speak with the preacher and file the necessary paperwork at the land office. Tessa spent the day continuing to clean the house, gradually transforming it from a neglected bachelor dwelling into something that felt like a home. In the small room that would have been Clara's pantry, Tessa found boxes of the previous wife's belongings that Kellan had clearly not known what to do with. There were clothes, some kitchen items, a few books, and a beautiful quilt folded carefully at the bottom of one trunk. Tessa handled everything with respect, understanding that these objects represented a whole life that had been cut short. When Kellan returned that evening, she asked him about the boxes. "I could not bring myself to get rid of her things," he admitted. "But I could not keep them out where I would see them every day either." "Would you like me to do something with them?" Tessa offered. "I could take them to the church, maybe, where they might help others." Kellan looked at her gratefully. "That would be kind. Keep the quilt, though. Clara's mother made it, and it is too fine to give away. Maybe we could use it on our bed." The phrase "our bed" sent a flutter through Tessa's stomach, but she simply nodded. These were the kinds of practical considerations that came with marriage, and she would need to get comfortable with them. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a strange blur of domesticity. Tessa cooked, cleaned, and began learning about the ranch operations. Kellan brought home the account books, and she spent hours going through them, getting a sense of the business. The numbers told a story of hard work and slim margins, but also of potential. With better organization and some strategic decisions, the ranch could be more profitable. "You are losing money on feed costs," she told Kellan one evening over supper. "You are paying premium prices because you buy in small quantities. If you could purchase in bulk for the whole season, you would save significantly." Kellan leaned back in his chair, impressed. "That requires more capital up front." "True, but the savings over a year would be substantial. Look at these figures." She showed him the calculations she had made, laying out the mathematics of it. He studied the numbers, then looked at her with growing respect. "You have a head for this. I told you I was good with figures. You undersold yourself." Kellan's smile was warm. "We are going to make a good team, Tessa Perkins." "Soon to be Tessa Lawson," she said, and felt a strange thrill at the words. The wedding took place on a Thursday afternoon in late August, in the small church that served Millerton and the surrounding ranches. It was a simple affair with few witnesses, just the necessary formalities to make their union legal and binding. Tessa wore a dress she had cleaned and pressed from her meager belongings, nothing fancy but respectable. Kellan wore his best shirt and had clearly taken pains with his appearance, his hair neatly trimmed and his jaw freshly shaved. Reverend Mitchell was a kindly older man who seemed to understand that this was a practical arrangement more than a love match. He kept the ceremony brief but respectful, speaking about partnership and commitment and the building of a life together. When he asked Kellan if he took Tessa to be his lawfully wedded wife, the cowboy's voice was steady and sure. "I do." When the same question was posed to Tessa, she felt the weight of the moment, the irrevocable nature of what she was agreeing to. But she looked at Kellan, at his honest face and the hope in his eyes, and she found her own voice. "I do." They were pronounced husband and wife, and Kellan kissed her cheek gently, a gesture that was respectful rather than passionate. It was enough for now, this promise of partnership, this beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. The few people present offered congratulations, including the shopkeeper who had first told Tessa about her uncle's death. He seemed surprised by the turn of events, but pleased in his way. "Welcome to Millerton, Mrs. Lawson," he said, and Tessa realized that she now belonged here, that she had a place and a name in this small desert community. They walked home together through the dusty streets, husband and wife, two people who had been strangers a week ago and were now bound for life. The reality of it settled over Tessa as they approached the house. The understanding that this was truly her home now, that Kellan was her husband, that she had just made one of the most significant decisions of her life based on faith rather than certainty. Kellan seemed to sense her nervousness. As they reached the porch, he turned to face her. "We do not have to change anything tonight," he said quietly. "You can keep your room off the kitchen. We can take this slow." Tessa appreciated the offer, but she also understood that marriage required commitment, required pushing past fear into trust. "I will move my things into the bedroom," she said. "We are married. We should live as married people. Only if you are comfortable with that." "I am not entirely comfortable," Tessa admitted. "But that does not mean it is not right. Sometimes the important things require bravery." Kellan's expression was tender. "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met." They spent the evening arranging the house for their new life together. Tessa moved her few belongings into the main bedroom, hanging her dresses beside Kellan's clothes in the wardrobe, placing her hairbrush on the dresser next to his shaving things. These small domestic acts felt momentous, each one a declaration that she was choosing this, choosing him, choosing to build something new. That night, they lay beside each other in the darkness, carefully maintaining a respectful distance. The bed was large enough that they did not touch, but Tessa was intensely aware of Kellan's presence, the sound of his breathing, the warmth of another person beside her. She had never shared a bed with anyone, had never been this vulnerable with another human being. "Thank you for trusting me," Kellan said into the darkness. "Thank you for being worthy of trust," Tessa replied. They fell asleep like that, two cautious people learning to share space and life and the terrifying hope that they might build something real together. The days following the wedding fell into a rhythm. Kellan worked the ranch while Tessa managed the house and the books. They ate meals together, worked side by side in the evenings, and gradually began to know each other beyond the surface. Tessa learned that Kellan had grown up in Texas, the son of a farmer who had lost everything in the years after the war. He had come to New Mexico seeking a fresh start, built his small herd from nothing through hard work and careful saving. He could read, but not elegantly, struggled with writing but was too proud to admit it needed improvement. Kellan learned that Tessa had been raised in New York, the daughter of Irish immigrants who had arrived with nothing and never managed to accumulate much more. Her father had died when she was 12, crushed in an accident at the docks. Her mother had worked herself to death trying to provide, dying when Tessa was 19. She had worked in factories for 3 years, saving every penny until she had enough to go west, chasing the dream of something better. "You are a long way from New York," Kellan observed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. "Thank God for that," Tessa said with feeling. "I never want to see another tenement or factory floor as long as I live. Does the desert not feel too empty after the city?" Tessa considered this, looking out at the vast expanse of land glowing gold in the fading light. It feels peaceful. In the city, you are always surrounded by people but completely alone. Here, there is space to breathe. I know what you mean. Kellan was quiet for a moment. I worried you might find it too isolated, that you might regret staying. I do not regret it, Tessa said honestly. This is the first place I have ever felt like I could build something lasting. The conversation drifted to other topics, but the words lingered in Tessa's mind as they prepared for bed that night. She did not regret her choice. That realization surprised her with its certainty. In the weeks since the wedding, Kellan had been nothing but respectful and kind. He was patient with her hesitations, never pushing for more affection than she was ready to give. They had not yet been intimate in the way married couples typically were, and he seemed content to let her set the pace. But Tessa was beginning to feel something shift inside her. The initial fear was giving way to trust, and trust was opening the door to something warmer. She found herself noticing small things about Kellan. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his strong hands, the sound of his laughter when she said something that amused him. These observations were adding up to an attraction she had not anticipated, a growing desire to be closer to this man, who had offered her not just security, but genuine partnership. One night in early September, as they lay in bed with the window open to catch the cool evening breeze, Tessa found the courage to close the distance between them. She moved across the bed slowly, giving Kellan time to understand her intention, and rested her head against his shoulder. He went very still, then carefully wrapped his arm around her. "Is this all right?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "Yes," Tessa said, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "This is all right." They stayed like that for a long time, simply holding each other, learning the feel of this new intimacy. When Kellan finally pressed a kiss to the top of her head, the gesture was so tender that Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. She had been afraid that marriage without love would be cold and lonely, but this warmth between them was real, even if it was not yet the passionate romance of novels. "I am starting to care for you," she whispered. "More than I expected to." Kellan's arm tightened around her. "I have been half in love with you since that first meal," he admitted. "I know I promised not to rush you, but I need you to know that this is real for me. You are not just a practical arrangement. You are becoming everything." The words should have terrified Tessa, but instead they filled her with something like joy. She turned in his arms to face him, and in the moonlight streaming through the window, she could see the truth in his eyes. This man loved her. Somehow, impossibly, in the space of a few weeks, Kellan Lawson had fallen in love with her, and she was falling too. Their first kiss was soft and questioning, a careful exploration of new territory. Tessa had been kissed before, quick stolen moments with boys in New York that had meant nothing. This was different. This was a promise and a possibility, a door opening onto a future she had not dared to imagine. When they finally drew apart, Kellan cupped her face in his hands. "We can still take this slow," he said. "I do not want to rush you into anything." "I know," Tessa said. "But I think I am ready to be your wife in all ways." What followed was tender and careful, two people learning each other with patience and care. Kellan was gentle with her inexperience, and Tessa found herself grateful for his maturity, his willingness to go slow and make sure she was comfortable. The physical intimacy sealed something between them, transformed their practical arrangement into a true marriage. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the sheets, Tessa felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she was meant to be. This man, this life, this hard, beautiful country. All of it had conspired to bring her to this moment, and she was exactly where she belonged. "I love you," she said, the words surprising her even as they emerged. Kellan pulled her closer, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too, more than I thought possible after Clara. You have given me back my life, Tessa. You gave me a life worth living," she replied. "We saved each other." As autumn settled over New Mexico, Tessa and Kellan's marriage deepened and strengthened. They were not just husband and wife, but true partners, working together to build their life. Tessa's management of the accounts made a real difference, allowing them to make strategic purchases that improved the ranch's efficiency. Kellan taught her to ride so she could accompany him on shorter trips around the property, and she found she loved being out on the open range, feeling the wind and sun on her face. The people of Millerton gradually accepted Tessa as one of their own. The shopkeeper's wife, a practical woman named Martha, became something of a friend, teaching Tessa about the local plants that could be used for medicine and cooking. The saloon keeper, a gruff man named Tom, always tipped his hat respectfully when Tessa passed. Even the suspicious old rancher who lived north of town eventually warmed to her after she helped nurse his horse through a bout of colic. But it was with Kellan that Tessa's life truly centered. She learned his moods, the way his jaw tightened when he was worried about money, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his dreams for expanding the herd. He learned her fears, the nightmares about poverty and helplessness that sometimes woke her in the night, the way she needed to keep her hands busy when she was anxious. They learned to communicate without words, a glance across the dinner table conveying volumes, a touch saying what speech could not. By November, Tessa realized she was pregnant. She knew even before she missed her courses, feeling a strange new awareness in her body. When she told Kellan, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, his joy uncomplicated and absolute. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Tessa asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it." Kellan set her down gently, his hands moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything, Tessa. A home, a partnership, love, and now a child. I could not ask for more." "We still have to get through the pregnancy and birth," Tessa cautioned, though she was smiling. "Let us not celebrate too soon." But Kellan was irrepressible in his excitement. He immediately began making plans, talking about adding on to the house to make more room, about how they would need to hire help so Tessa would not have to work as hard. His concern was touching, if slightly excessive. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," Tessa reminded him. "I am not going to break. I know. But you are precious to me, and I will not take any risks with your health or the baby's." His protectiveness was endearing, even when it became slightly overbearing. Tessa navigated the early months of pregnancy with the same practical determination she brought to everything else. The morning sickness was unpleasant but manageable. The fatigue was harder, forcing her to accept help with tasks that had been easy before. Martha proved invaluable, teaching Tessa what to expect and helping her prepare baby clothes and supplies. Winter in New Mexico was cold but drier than the eastern winters Tessa had known, with brilliant sunny days between the cold snaps. Kellan spent more time working close to home, unwilling to be far from Tessa for extended periods. They spent long evenings by the fire, Tessa sewing tiny garments while Kellan read aloud from the few books they owned, his reading slowly improving with practice. As her belly swelled, Tessa found herself amazed by the changes in her body, by the reality of new life growing inside her. She would place Kellan's hand on her stomach so he could feel the baby kick, and the wonder on his face made her fall more deeply in love with him each time. This was their child, created from their union, a living symbol of what they were building together. "You hope for a boy or a girl?" Kellan asked one evening as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her rounded stomach. "I do not care as long as the baby is healthy," Tessa said. "Though I think you would like a son to help with the ranch." "I would love a daughter just as much," Kellan said seriously. "A little girl with your determination and intelligence would be a force to be reckoned with. A boy with your steadiness and kindness would be pretty wonderful too. Either way, this child will be loved beyond measure." Kellan pressed a kiss to her belly. "And they will know from the beginning that they are wanted and valued." The baby was born on a warm day in early June, after a labor that was long and difficult but ultimately successful. Martha attended as midwife, along with the doctor from Santa Fe who happened to be in the area. Kellan paced outside for hours, unable to sit still, driven nearly mad by the sounds of Tessa's labor. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and healthy, the doctor called Kellan in to meet his son. Tessa, exhausted but elated, held the tiny infant against her chest while Kellan knelt beside the bed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "You are perfect. Thank you, Tessa. Thank you for this gift." They named him James, after Kellan's father, and he was indeed perfect. A healthy, hungry baby with a good set of lungs and his father's blue-green eyes. Kellan was besotted from the first moment, holding his son with such tender care that Tessa's heart nearly burst. She had worried he might be disappointed not to have waited longer, that the baby might feel like an obligation. Instead, James became the center of Kellan's world, second only to Tessa herself. The first year of motherhood was exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Tessa learned to function on broken sleep, to nurse and change and soothe an infant while still managing the household and accounts. Kellan helped more than she had expected, rising in the night to bring her the baby, taking James for long walks when he was fussy so Tessa could rest. They were partners in parenthood as they were partners in everything, figuring it out together. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. The strategic decisions Tessa had pushed for paid off, allowing them to expand the herd and improve their living conditions. They added 2 rooms to the house, creating more space for their growing family. Kellan hired a young cowboy named Pete to help with the daily work, freeing him to spend more time with Tessa and James. On their second wedding anniversary, Kellan surprised Tessa with a gift. A beautiful mare, gentle and well-trained, perfect for a less experienced rider. "I know you have been wanting to ride more," he said. "Now that James is older, I thought maybe we could go out together sometimes, the 3 of us." Tessa threw her arms around his neck, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I love it. I love you. I love you too." Kellan kissed her soundly. "These 2 years have been the best of my life, Tessa. You and James, you are everything to me." "You are everything to us," Tessa replied, meaning it absolutely. The scared, desperate woman who had stepped off that stage 2 years ago felt like a different person. She had found love, built a home, created a family. She had found herself in this hard, beautiful country, had discovered strengths she had not known she possessed. When James was 3, Tessa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news felt less like a miracle and more like a natural next step in their growing family. Kellan was just as excited but less frantically protective, having learned from the first pregnancy that Tessa was stronger than she looked. Their daughter was born in March, an easier birth than James had been, arriving after only a few hours of labor. They named her Catherine, called Katie from the start, and she was a quieter baby than her brother had been, content to watch the world with curious dark eyes. James adored his little sister, wanting to help with everything, bringing her toys and singing to her in his off-key toddler voice. Kellan watched his growing family with the satisfaction of a man who had everything he had ever wanted. Tessa, holding her daughter while her son played at her feet and her husband smiled at them all, felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. Life was not always easy. There were hard years when the cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There was the year of drought when they lost part of the herd and had to make difficult decisions about which animals to keep. There was the fever that swept through Millerton, sparing their family but taking several neighbors. But through all of it, Tessa and Kellan faced challenges together, their partnership deepening with each obstacle overcome. They added 2 more children to their family over the next several years, another son named Thomas, and finally, a daughter named Rose. The house rang with children's voices, with laughter and arguments and the beautiful chaos of a full life. Tessa sometimes paused in her work to marvel at how far she had come from that desperate day when she arrived in Millerton with nothing. As the children grew, they each developed their own personalities. James was serious and hardworking, clearly destined to take over the ranch someday. Katie was clever and curious, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. Thomas was the charmer, able to talk his way out of trouble and make everyone smile. Rose was the wild one, fearless and determined, driving Tessa to distraction with her adventures. Kellan was a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching the children about the land and the animals, about hard work and integrity. Tessa managed the ever-growing household and continued to handle the ranch accounts, which became more complex as the operation expanded. They were a team in every sense, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kellan took Tessa up to a ridge overlooking their land, just the 2 of them having escaped for a few hours while Martha watched the children. They sat on a blanket looking out over the ranch that had grown so much in a decade, at the house that was now truly a home, at the land that represented their hard work and dreams. "You ever think about that first night?" Kellan asked, his arm around Tessa's shoulders. "When you cooked that first meal, I think about it often," Tessa admitted. "I was so scared. I had no idea that I was cooking the meal that would change my entire life. I knew the moment I tasted your food that I could not let you leave," Kellan said. "It was not just the meal, though that was wonderful. It was seeing you work, seeing your determination and capability. It was the way you transformed my sad bachelor kitchen into something warm and welcoming in just a few hours. I looked at you standing there at the wash basin, and I could suddenly see a future I had thought was lost to me forever. That was quite a leap of faith, asking me to marry you before I had even finished the dishes," Tessa teased gently. "Best decision I ever made." Kellan kissed her temple. "You have given me everything, Tessa. Not just children and a well-run home, though those are wonderful gifts. You have given me joy and partnership and love that grows deeper every year. You took my broken life and helped me build something beautiful." "We built it together," Tessa corrected. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing. You treated me with respect and kindness. You let me be your true partner, not just a servant or an ornament. You gave me a home and a family and a love I never dared dream of." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Below them, the ranch sprawled across the high desert, a testament to their hard work. Cattle grazed on land they had carefully managed and improved. The house they had expanded and maintained stood solid and welcoming. It was not a grand estate, but it was theirs, built by their own hands and hearts. "You ever miss New York?" Kellan asked. Tessa laughed. "Not even for a moment. This is home. You are home. Our children, this land, this life we have built together. This is exactly where I am meant to be." As they rode back down to the house, the sun setting behind them, Tessa reflected on the strange paths that led people to their destinies. She had come to New Mexico desperate and alone, expecting to work in her uncle's restaurant. Instead, she had cooked one meal for a lonely cowboy and found forever before she finished the dishes. It was the kind of story people would think was too improbable to be true, too quick to be real. But Tessa knew that sometimes love did not follow expected timelines. Sometimes it struck like lightning, recognition passing between two souls who understood that they were meant to weather life's storms together. She and Kellan had been brave enough to seize that moment, to trust in possibility even when logic said they were moving too fast. And that bravery had been rewarded with a love that deepened with every passing year, with children who were the joy of their lives, with a partnership that made them both stronger and better than they could have been alone. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growing of their children. James took on more responsibility as he entered his teenage years, working alongside Kellan and learning everything about running the operation. Katie developed a passion for the account books, showing the same aptitude for numbers that Tessa had. Thomas proved to be gifted with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animals. Rose, true to her wild nature, was happiest out on the range, riding like she had been born in the saddle. Tessa and Kellan watched their children grow with pride and some amazement. They had built not just a family but a legacy, something that would outlast them. The ranch was prospering, providing well for all of them, and there was talk of James eventually marrying a neighboring rancher's daughter, which would strengthen ties in the community and expand their holdings. But for Tessa, the real measure of their success was not in acres or cattle or even in their healthy, happy children. It was in the small moments that made up a life. Kellan reaching for her hand across the dinner table, his touch still sending warmth through her after all these years. The sound of their children's laughter filling the house. The peaceful evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over land they had poured their hearts into. The way Kellan still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. When Millerton celebrated its 25th anniversary as an official town, Tessa and Kellan were honored as pillars of the community. They had been there almost since the beginning, had weathered hard times and good, had raised their children to be contributing members of society. The recognition was nice, but Tessa cared more about the genuine friendships they had built, the way neighbors helped each other through difficulties, the sense of belonging she had found in this small desert community. At the celebration, Martha pulled Tessa aside, her eyes twinkling with memory. "I remember when you first arrived, you know. Young and scared, though you tried to hide it. I thought to myself, that girl will not last 6 months in this hard country. Never been happier to be wrong." "I almost did not last 6 days," Tessa admitted. "If Kellan had not offered me work, I do not know what I would have done." "It was meant to be," Martha said with conviction. "Some things are just destiny. You two were meant to find each other, meant to build what you have built. Anyone can see that." That night, as they walked home under a canopy of stars so thick, it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet, Tessa thought about Martha's words. Destiny was a comforting idea, suggesting that their struggles had purpose, that the hard times had been leading them toward something better. Whether it was destiny or simply luck or the reward for being brave enough to take chances, Tessa was grateful for every moment of the life she had found. "What are you thinking about?" Kellan asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "About how lucky we are," Tessa said. "About how a single moment of bravery changed everything. Your bravery or mine? Both. Me trusting a stranger, you risking your heart again after loss. Both of us choosing to believe that something good could come from desperate circumstances." Kellan stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, right there in the middle of the road under the stars. "I love you, Tessa Lawson. I have loved you since you cooked me that first meal, and I will love you until my last breath. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Tessa whispered against his chest. "You saved my life in every way that matters." They held each other in the starlight, two people who had built a world together from nothing but faith and hard work and love. It was not the kind of romance that poets wrote about, with grand gestures and dramatic declarations. It was quieter than that, more practical, built on shared labor and mutual respect and the choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year. But it was no less powerful for its quietness. In fact, Tessa thought it was more powerful because it was real and tested and had proven itself through the challenges that broke lesser bonds. They had built something that would last, something that would extend beyond their own lives into the lives of their children and grandchildren. As they reached their house, warm light spilling from the windows and the sound of their children's voices carrying on the evening air, Tessa sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For the stagecoach that had brought her to Millerton, for the uncle whose death had left her stranded, for her own desperation that had made her brave enough to accept help from a stranger, for Kellan's loneliness that had made him bold enough to ask her to stay, for one meal that had changed everything. Life, she had learned, could turn on such small moments. A meal cooked, a question asked, a leap of faith taken. One brave decision could set in motion a chain of events that transformed everything. She and Kellan had both made brave decisions that day, and they had been making brave decisions together ever since, building a life that was richer and fuller than either of them could have imagined alone. The children greeted them as they entered, James reporting on the day's work, Katie showing them her latest drawings, Thomas begging for a story before bed, Rose demanding to know when they could go riding again. Tessa and Kellan moved through the evening routines with the ease of long practice, getting the younger children to bed, discussing ranch business with James, reviewing Katie's schoolwork. Later, as they prepared for bed themselves, Tessa caught sight of their reflection in the mirror. They were older now, no longer the young people who had married in haste all those years ago. Kellan's hair was touched with gray at the temples, and lines had deepened around his eyes. Tessa's own face showed the years, the marks of laughter and worry and a life fully lived. But when she looked at them together, she saw something beautiful, two people who had grown not apart but more deeply together with time. "What are you smiling about?" Kellan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just thinking about how good we look together," Tessa said. "How right. We do we not?" Kellan met her eyes in the mirror. "Aged like fine wine. More like aged leather," Tessa teased. "Tough and weathered, but still strong, still useful." Kellan turned her to face him. Still deeply in love. Their kiss was familiar and sweet, carrying the weight of years and the promise of years still to come. They climbed into bed, the same bed they had shared for so many nights, and settled into each other with the ease of two people who fit together perfectly. "Kellan," Tessa said softly into the darkness. "Yes, if you could go back to that day, knowing everything that would happen, would you still ask me to stay?" "Every time," he answered without hesitation. "I would ask you 1,000 times in 1,000 lifetimes. You are my home, Tessa. You always will be." "You are mine too," she whispered. "My home, my heart, my everything." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, secure in the love they had built and nurtured over long years. Outside, the New Mexico night was clear and cold, stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns. Inside, the house was warm and full of the presence of a family that loved each other fiercely. It was everything Tessa had never dared to dream of, and more than she could have imagined that desperate day when she had stepped off the stage with nothing but hope. The seasons continued their endless cycle, bringing the family new joys and challenges. When James married Sarah, the neighboring rancher's daughter, it was a celebration that brought the whole community together. The wedding was far grander than Tessa and Kellan's hasty ceremony had been, with music and dancing and a feast that lasted late into the night. Watching her son pledge his life to the woman he loved, Tessa felt the circle of life completing itself in a satisfying way. A year later, James and Sarah presented them with their first grandchild, a boy they named Jacob. Holding her grandson for the first time, feeling the tiny weight of him in her arms, Tessa marveled at how life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. She had gone from having no family at all to being surrounded by children and grandchildren, from having no home to being the matriarch of a growing dynasty. "You are thinking too hard," Kellan observed, coming to stand beside her as she rocked little Jacob. "Just amazed by all of this," Tessa said, "by everything we have built." "It started with you," Kellan reminded her. "That first meal, that first brave decision to stay, everything else grew from that." "It started with both of us being brave enough to take a chance," Tessa corrected. "I cooked a meal, you asked me to stay forever before I finished the dishes. That was both of us choosing hope over fear." Kellan pressed a kiss to the top of her head, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "Best choice either of us ever made." As the years continued to pass, the ranch grew and prospered under the combined management of Kellan, James, and increasingly Katie, who had a gift for finding new markets and negotiating better prices. Thomas married a girl from Santa Fe and built his own small horse ranch nearby, while Rose shocked everyone by falling in love with a doctor and moving to Albuquerque, though she visited often. Tessa and Kellan gradually handed over more of the day-to-day operations to their children, giving themselves time to simply enjoy the life they had built. They took long rides together, just the two of them, revisiting favorite spots and discovering new ones. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once played. They held hands and talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the deep companionship that came from a lifetime shared. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that seemed to involve half of New Mexico territory. There were speeches and toasts, and more than one person commented on how remarkable their marriage was, how lucky they were to have found each other. Tessa and Kellan accepted the congratulations with grace, but they both knew that luck had played only a small part. What they had built was the result of choice and effort, of deciding every day to love each other, to work together, to face challenges as a team. 25 years, Kellan marveled that night as they finally escaped to the quiet of their bedroom. "A quarter century since you cooked that first meal." "Do you remember what I made?" Tessa asked. "Potato hash, eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy and jam," Kellan recited without hesitation. "Best meal I ever ate, and not just because the food was good. It was the first time in 2 years that my house felt like a home. It was the first time I let myself hope that life could be good again." "I was so scared," Tessa admitted. "I thought I was just cooking supper to earn my keep for a few days. I had no idea I was cooking my way into a whole new life." "I knew," Kellan said. "The moment I tasted your food, saw how you had transformed my kitchen, watched you move around my house like you belonged there, I knew I had to find a way to make you stay. Asking you to marry me was the boldest thing I ever did. And I was crazy enough to say yes. Best kind of crazy." Kellan pulled her close. "Thank you for saying yes, Tessa. Thank you for every yes you have said in the past 25 years. Yes to marriage, yes to children, yes to building this life with me. Every yes has been a gift. Thank you for asking, Tessa replied. Thank you for seeing something in me worth keeping. Thank you for being patient while I learn to love you. Thank you for being the kind of man who makes love easy. They celebrated their love quietly that night, with the tenderness that came from deep familiarity and the passion that had never quite faded. After a quarter century, they still wanted each other, still found joy in their intimate connection. It was one of the many blessings of their marriage, this physical harmony that complemented their emotional and practical partnership. The years flowed on, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Kellan's hair went completely gray, and his movements slowed, but his eyes still lit up when Tessa entered a room. Tessa's hands became gnarled with arthritis, and she moved more carefully, but her mind remained sharp and her love for Kellan never wavered. They grew old together, watching the world change around them. New technologies arrived, making ranch work easier but somehow less personal. The town grew, attracting new people and new businesses. But through all the changes, the core of their life remained constant: love, family, hard work, and the land that had given them everything. On a warm evening in late summer, when Tessa was in her 60s and Kellan in his 70s, they sat on their porch watching the sun set over land that 4 generations of their family had worked and loved. Their great-grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Inside, 3 generations of their descendants prepared supper together, carrying on traditions that Tessa and Kellan had established decades ago. "You have any regrets?" Tessa asked, her hand clasped in Kellan's weathered one. "Not a single one," Kellan said firmly. "Every choice brought me here to this moment with you. How could I regret any of that?" "I feel the same way," Tessa said. "Even the hard times, the losses and struggles, they were all part of the journey that made us who we are." "Tell me again," Kellan said, his voice soft with memory. "Tell me about that first day." Tessa smiled, knowing exactly what he wanted to hear. "I stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but a carpet bag and desperate hope. I learned my uncle was dead and I was alone in a strange place. I walked around town looking for any kind of work, and I found you in a corral, gentling a horse. You looked at me with kind eyes and offered me a chance when I had no other options. I cooked you a simple meal, just basic food from what you had on hand, but I put everything I had into it. And you crazy brave man, you asked me to stay forever before I even finished the dishes." "It was the easiest decision I ever made," Kellan said, just as he always did when she told this story. "I looked at you and saw my future." "We were so young," Tessa marveled, "so foolish and brave." "We were desperate," Kellan corrected. "But we were also wise enough to recognize a gift when it appeared. We were brave enough to take a chance on each other." "And look what we built," Tessa said, gesturing at the scene before them. The prosperous ranch, the full house, the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were their legacy. All from one meal and one brave question. All from 2 people choosing to believe in possibility, Kellan added. Choosing to trust when trust was hard. Choosing to love when love seemed impossible. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Tessa thought about the long road that had brought them here, from that desperate day in 1878 to this peaceful evening in a new century. She thought about every meal she had cooked, every challenge they had faced, every joy they had celebrated together. It had been a good life, a full life, better than anything she could have imagined in her darkest moments before Kellan. "I love you," she said simply. "After all these years, it still needs to be said." I love you too, Kellan replied. Until my last breath and beyond. As night fell and the family called them in to supper, Tessa and Kellan rose from their chairs with the careful movements of age, but their hands remained firmly clasped. They walked into the warm house together, surrounded by the noise and love of the family they had created, the legacy they had built from nothing but hope and hard work, and a brave decision made one August evening long ago. The meal that night was chaotic and joyful. Multiple generations gathered around tables that had to be pushed together to accommodate everyone. There was laughter and storytelling, children chattering and adults catching up on news. Tessa sat at the head of the table with Kellan beside her, and she thought about that first meal she had cooked for him, just the two of them in a dusty kitchen that had seen no joy in years. From that one simple meal had grown all of this. A love that had lasted decades, children who had become good people, grandchildren who were continuing the legacy, great-grandchildren who represented hope for the future. One meal, cooked by a desperate woman for a lonely man, had been the seed from which an entire family tree had grown. As the evening wound down and family members began departing for their own homes, Tessa and Kellan bid them all goodbye with hugs and kisses and promises to gather again soon. Finally, they were alone in the house that had been their refuge and their kingdom for so many years. They prepared for bed slowly, helping each other with buttons that arthritic fingers could not manage, moving through routines worn smooth by repetition. When they finally settled into bed, Kellan pulled Tessa close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you for the life you gave me," Tessa whispered, "for seeing something worth saving in a scared girl on a dusty street." "Thank you for saying yes," Kellan replied, "for being brave enough to build a life with a stranger, for loving me even when you had every reason to be afraid." "I was never afraid of you," Tessa said. "From the very beginning, I knew you were a good man. I just had to learn to trust in the possibility of happiness." "And did you find happiness?" "More than I ever dreamed possible," Tessa assured him. "You gave me everything, Kellan. A home, a family, a purpose, and love beyond measure. I could not have asked for more." "Neither could I," Kellan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You made my life worth living again. You filled my empty house and my broken heart. You gave me reasons to get up every morning and hope for tomorrow. You are the great love of my life, Tessa Lawson." "And you are mine," she replied. They fell asleep like that, holding each other as they had for countless nights over the decades. Two people who had chosen love when it would have been easier to stay alone, who had built something beautiful from desperate circumstances, who had proven that sometimes the greatest romances begin with the simplest gestures. A meal cooked, a question asked, a hand extended in hope and faith. The story of how Tessa Perkins became Tessa Lawson was not a tale of love at first sight or grand romantic gestures. It was a story of practicality transforming into passion, of partnership deepening into profound connection, of two wounded people healing each other and building something greater than either could have achieved alone. It was a story of bravery and faith, of choosing to trust when trust seemed impossible, of believing in the possibility of happiness even in the darkest moments. And it all started with one meal, cooked by a desperate woman for a lonely cowboy, leading to a question asked before the dishes were even dry. "Would you consider staying, not just for now but permanently?" That question, and Tessa's brave answer, had echoed through the decades, creating ripples that would extend far beyond their own lives. Their children told the story to their children, who told it to theirs, passing down the legacy of courage and love that had founded their family. It became a story about taking chances, about looking past fear to see possibility, about the extraordinary things that could grow from the smallest seeds. Years later, when Kellan finally passed away peacefully in his sleep with Tessa beside him, the entire region mourned the loss of a good man. And years after that, when Tessa joined him, having lived a long and remarkably full life, they buried her next to her husband under a stone that read, "Together in life, together in death, together forever." But their real monument was not made of stone. It was made of living people, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and beyond, all carrying forward the legacy of love and courage that had started with one brave meal and one bold question. It was made of the successful ranch that still bore the Lawson name, of the values they had instilled that continued to guide their descendants, of the love they had modeled that taught generations what a true partnership looked like. In the end, Tessa and Kellan's story was proof that love does not always arrive in expected ways or follow conventional timelines. Sometimes it comes in the form of a desperate woman cooking a simple meal. Sometimes it speaks through a lonely cowboy brave enough to ask a stranger to stay forever. Sometimes it builds slowly from practical necessity into something profound and lasting. And sometimes, just sometimes, the greatest love stories begin not with a first glance across a crowded room, but with flour-dusted hands at a wash basin, and a question asked before the dishes were even dry, launching two people into a lifetime of love, partnership, and shared purpose that would echo through generations, all because they were brave enough to say yes to possibility when the world had given them every reason to say no.